All right, welcome everyone. My name is Eric Lagatuta. I'm a professor of drawing and painting here at Moraine Valley Community College, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Jean Ha. Jean, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Jean, thank you so much for being here. It is such a treat and a gift for us, and for conducting this workshop for my drawing comics class here at the college. So this workshop is happening in conjunction with Jean's exhibition here in the DiCaprio Gallery downstairs in the Fine Arts Building on our campus. You guys saw some of these pieces yesterday, actually. This show showcases pages and I think some covers too. From pretty much the full range of your career?
Pretty close. It's just like there's a gap in the very beginning of my career, about 2 years, but then after that, yes.
Great. Awesome. Here's some screenshots of some of those pictures on the wall. So, Jean, your bio says that you started working professionally around 92 or 93 for
92,
DC Comics,
yes.
Right? And you've done work for Marvel and Dark Horse and other top American publishers?
Yeah, it's in some ways, it's almost easier for me to list the ones I haven't worked for. So
Sure.
Nothing
Indeed.
for Antarctica, yes. So,
Indeed. Yeah. Guys, I was telling you the other day, Jean is very well known for some of the work he did in the early noughts for a book called Top 10, working with probably the top writer in comics, Mr. Alan Moore, and fellow artist Xander Cannon, as well as others. I think Todd Klein did the letters in that book. Amazing. So Top 10, as I was telling you guys, is a bit of a mashup between a superhero story and a kind of a procedural cop story. It's got a lot of humor in it and a lot of intense, imagery. So Jean is the winner of 4 Eisner Awards. Come on in, you can grab a seat over here. Jean is the winner of 4 Eisner Awards. If you guys don't know what the Eisners are, they are the Oscars of the comic book world, as we would say.
Yeah.
He won an Eisner in 2000 for Top 10 for Best New Series, along with Alan Moore and Xander Cannon, and then again in 2001 for Best Continuing Series, I believe.
Let me see. Yeah, then I got 2 more, I think, for Top 10, and then for 49ers.
Yeah, and then Top 10 49ers, right? That was 2006, according to Wikipedia.
Okay.
For Best New Graphic Album, I guess they call it, or graphic novel.
Yeah.
And then 2008 for Best Single Issue of Justice League of America number 11. That's the right cover, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. I saw there's a number of different ones in there, so that's the one you drew. I think there's some variant covers. And in recent years, Jean has been focusing on this book called May, which is his creator-owned, sort of a YA, a bit young adult, would you say?
Yeah, it's aimed at the young adults, so yeah.
Science fantasy series, I would say, yeah. And you've been working on that for a number of years now.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So just to be a fanboy for a minute, I mean, I was gushing to you guys yesterday in the other class about this, but just, his work, Jean, your work's been super influential to me over the years. I started reading in the early 2000s when I saw your work on Top 10. The intense world building is immediately apparent in many of your stories. With you can see these pages from Top 10 here with the richly detailed backgrounds, that uncolored page on the right. I don't know how you do those. And some other pages on the left there. Realistic detail, obviously, yes, but also this ability to combine realistic detail and lighting, and sometimes really strong shadows, with this expressive cartooning at the same time, which I think is really apparent, especially in these pages from May coming in there. So that stuff is super, super influential to me. So Jean is currently drawing a book for DC Comics called Wonder Woman Historia, The Amazons, Volume 2, working with Kelly Sue DeConnick, which must be amazing.
Yeah, I've got a sample page showing the script process and a few other details like that. And the scripts are just mind-blowingly good. And also, she trusts you. Or at least, she trusts me. And she often will throw a creative challenge at me where there's no obvious solution and she doesn't know how I'll solve it. But she's like, I think you'll do something creative here. And it's like, I guess she was right, I say a few days later.
That's got to be a gift.
Yeah.
As an artist, great. Awesome. So before we get into the demonstrations, Jean's going to be doing some demos for us. He's going to be talking about how to lay out a page, We're going to get into some stuff about character expressions. You saw some of the drawings that they were working on, I think, at the beginning here. These guys were doing, this week is character expression, facial expression week, so that's going to be great for them. And then if we have time, we're going to get into some hints about perspective on a comic book page, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to try to make all the lessons I'm going to do apply to any style. If you want to add just a hint of realism to it, but it should work for any cartoon style. So any cartoon style where you want to have a building in three-point perspective, if you want to get some tricks on how realistic anatomy applies to how our brain registers emotions when we see it, I'm going to go over that type of stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you want things about the trapezius or the quadriceps, I can talk about that too.
Indeed.
Not as useful to most of you.
Yeah, I mean, they're not all necessarily doing like as realistic a style as you are or myself, but yeah. But I've said this to you guys before too, right? Understanding how a realistic figure works in gesture, right, and how the underlying anatomy makes that is still applicable to Bugs Bunny, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's about how our body, how the reader sees the signals you're sending and interprets them. And if you understand how real anatomy or real perspective applies to that, you can still use it inside of a very cartoony style.
Indeed, and it also applies to facial expressions.
Oh,
too,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even if you aren't drawing a human, we respond to those naturalistic human facial expressions. So it's finding how to import that into your cartoon.
Yeah, it's like any mammal has no problem telling when another mammal is being aggressive towards it. We just can see the facial expression. It's the same cues.
Great. Okay, so we're going to start before the demos with a couple just general questions about Gene's background. I'm sure you guys are interested to learn a little bit about what it's like to, be a young person drawing and then move into the comic book world. So, Gene, can you say a few words about how you started drawing before you were working professionally?
So I went to a high school in South Bend, Indiana, which is now a creative magnet school. It was really not at the time I went there. Barely any art classes. Oh God, I remember like one of the projects was take a ballpoint pen on a big piece of construction paper, draw a squiggle on it. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do the best squiggle I can do, the most entertaining squiggle. And then afterwards, the teacher announced, in every little sectioned off area with a line around it, I want you to put a different black and white pattern you're going to draw in ballpoint pen. And I'd done more squiggles than anybody else, so I had more patterns to figure out. And that took a week, and I was like, I learned absolutely nothing from this except not to do this project again.
Excellent, excellent. What led you to? I'm sorry. Did you want?
Oh, actually,
yeah.
you know what? Because you kind of gave me a clue about some stuff that we were going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Some of the slides applied to the questions you're asking.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So let me
Go
just.
ahead. I just unstreamed me, so if you want to link up to it.
Come on, recognize me. Okay, hold on a second.
Is it asking you for a number?
Because I'm wearing a mask, I don't usually wear a mask when I'm
I
unlocking
see.
it.
Yeah, you have to dial your thing in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing about teaching with my iPad that is annoying.
There we
I have
go.
to keep typing my darn,
Okay.
thing in there. Excellent. There we go.
And that slide is from my some things I wanted to talk about with facial expressions. But, here we go. I like to include this. This is my first rejection letter.
Oh, really?
It's actually my
from Marvel. I heard, I read that in Wikipedia too. It said like Marvel rejected you and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, I finished up 5 years of a 4-year art school program, and I thought I was a real hotshot at that point. I mean, I took an extra year. So.
Yeah.
So I sent in my samples, and this is a list of all the things you can do wrong.
Yeah.
And except for one, storytelling, they checked them off or underlined them.
Yes.
And then I added a PS of extra problems I had.
Try again.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
So how was that when you got that letter back?
I just, except for basic biological eating and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I just pretty much laid on the couch for 3 days.
Oh, geez. I can only imagine.
Yeah, but as my backup plan, I'd sent samples to DC,
Yeah.
who also sent a letter from that said, well, we don't want you to draw our comics. But that editor said, but I'd love to see more samples.
Ah,
And can I send you a script?
that's awesome.
Yeah, and at that point, that editor then mentored me through polishing my work up till
Yeah.
it was good enough for him to give me an assignment.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
That never happens.
Yeah, I mean, every creator seems to have a different story about how they broke into the business, but having that kind of invitation and that kind of work, that invitation and just help getting in there. That must have been awesome. Great. So, are there any specific stories or comics or novels or movies that inspired your interest in getting into? I mean, you started drawing superheroes right off the bat, and that was your main interest going in, yeah? Were there?
Yeah, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, which is before there was widespread access. No, I mean, before there was any access worth mentioning to manga. Anime was just a few on TV, like Speed Racer and Prince Planet. Almost anything you've heard of was not out yet in America.
Yeah.
So let me see. I was a huge fan of artists like John Byrne.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can see here me trying to copy his style in pencil when I was probably in freshman or in middle school.
That's John Byrne style there?
It's influence. If you look at like the way the flames are done here,
Wow.
that's me just ripping them off pretty literally.
Cool. Sweet.
By the time I got to high school, Matt Wagner's Mage, which painted comics were incredibly rare back then. And the idea of a digitally painted comics didn't come out until I was in art school, and at that point it looked like a bad dot. It literally was a bad dot matrix printer.
Yeah, yes, I remember those. Yeah.
But seeing this just kind of blew my mind then.
Yeah.
And if you look at the grainy texture from the airbrush, you can see I still like having a little bit of film grain / airbrush texture inside my work.
Sure.
And I'll try to apply that when I do color work.
Yeah. Cool. So that's early digitally.
Oh, it's not
stuff.
digital. This is
that's
airbrush.
not. That's actual airbrush.
Yeah, it's
oh,
airbrush
okay.
on top of inks.
Oh, okay. Cool. Mage, yes.
And someone who's still my art idol now is Bill Sienkiewicz. He was the second artist to work on New Mutants, one of the X-Men books.
Yeah.
And I hated, I mean, this is cruel to say, but I just hated the first artist. I just did not want to read his stuff. And I hated how he drew teenagers.
Sure.
And then Bill Sienkiewicz took over, and suddenly he had people, something I'd never seen in comic books before, which was realistic anatomy, special facial anatomy, realistic body language. So it was realistic, but it's also really clear what the emotions are.
Indeed.
And at the time, like for instance, if you look at old pictures of Nightcrawler from the X-Men and how they did him, to indicate that he had a very dark face and there were always kind of shadowy areas, there was a very specific pattern of dark marks on his face that were supposed to be the shadows, no matter which direction he was lit from, no matter what kind of light or dark conditions he was in, it was always the same.
Yeah.
And Bill Sienkiewicz actually just drew realistic shadows on his face, which was really surprising back then.
Wow. Cool.
And I actually own that page.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
Wow.
I tracked it down years later and grabbed it.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Beautiful.
But yeah, he was a huge influence on me. He's still a huge influence on me today because if you follow his any of his social media, every time a celebrity dies that he loves, he'll tend to do a portrait of them and then post it, and they're beautiful. And
Oh wow.
he paints faster than I draw.
Wow.
He's just an amazing artist.
Yeah. Cool. I read on also probably Wikipedia, and I think no, it was in the back of Volume 2 of May also, that Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general were influential to you.
Oh yeah.
Can you maybe say a little bit about that and how the game worlds inspired work on May?
In part, I mean, so I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, then a game called Villains and Vigilantes, a superhero tabletop role-playing game back then.
Sure.
And then also I took high school improv, just because I wanted an extra that sounded like fun. Which just, I didn't realize they were the same thing. And that a game like Dungeons and Dragons is very much about just improvising a story with your friends and playing back and forth and saying yes to other people's ideas and stuff if you're doing it right. Which just left me very open to creative, working with other people creatively. Even if their ideas don't seem like your style, just saying yes to it and trying to figure out how you can add your little bit to make it even better, and then they can make it better, and just, that whole ping pong back and forth of just trying to make the best thing possible that no single person could make. So it's not so much that affected my visual arts Dungeons and Dragons or improv did, but it affected my story sense and allowed me to work with writers in a way that was really incredibly useful. I'll just mention, like, Alan Moore is the only person whose mind is so fast, I can't improv with him creative ideas for a story.
He's just too far ahead.
He's too far ahead, he's too smart, and because he was such a huge influence on me when I was in high school, when I was talking to him on the phone, often he'd say, "Do you have any ideas on what we could do with this issue?" And I'd say something, and we'd both have an awkward pause where we both realized, "Oh yeah, that's something you did 20 years ago, Alan."
Oh, wow. Yeah, wow, what an amazing thing to be somebody you idolized in high school, and now you were working with him early in your career, relatively early.
Yeah.
Well, not super, but that, yeah, I can't even imagine what a treat that was.
Yeah. Oh, and also, the person who wrote my favorite, if you play any type of tabletop role-playing games, my favorite written adventure for a game, Bill Willingham, soon transitioned to comics, and then I loved his comics, and then I was able to work with him on other projects like Fables.
Oh, cool. Oh, you know, I didn't even put it together that he had transitioned. I know the name from both worlds, and I never put it together that it was the same person.
Yeah, he got out of the army, where he'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons while watching the West German border for invading Soviet tanks.
Wow.
Which fortunately has never happened yet, or Russian tanks. And then got back to the United States and found it was really easy to get hired by the people making Dungeons and Dragons back then. And it was like, "Oh, you'll hire anybody? I'm anybody."
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So do you still play at all?
Once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Panini pandemic problems. I mean, it's been really hard to schedule, but we're supposed to do one later this month.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I started over the pandemic with the people I played with in high school.
Yeah.
Since we're all over the country, we started playing again. So I'm playing again now.
Oh, nice.
First edition, of course.
Oh, wow.
Great, awesome. So May is a fantasy story. It's got a lot of steampunk in it, and you know, there's elements we could see, you know, not slight borrowings from other classic fantasy like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and maybe some Alice in Wonderland. Are there also is there Czech folklore in May?
Not so much folklore, but actual real Czech culture.
And that's Czech language in there.
There's some, I did have a Czech language professor from the University of Chicago who's helped me out with the names of monsters and stuff. So the monster names in Czech aren't real Czech words you'd find inside of a dictionary, but they are what would sound like logical monster names in the Czech language.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, it's such specific language, and it's not your typical fantasy speak that all sounds like some mutation of Tolkien. It seemed like it was rooted in some very specific folklore.
Yeah, it's a fantasy world where there weren't any humans when, in the 19th century, humans discovered a doorway to it. And then two main populations colonized that world, again, without humans. And they were Czechs, who were living inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and African Americans, who were living inside the United States. And for obvious reasons, neither one wanted their governments to find out about this doorway because they had a place where they weren't being oppressed. So you also find things like Mount Tuskegee inside that world and stuff too.
Yeah, I recall those things. I've got some of these books here, guys, if you want to take a look at them later, and I may ask you to sign some of these later, too, if you're amenable to that. So awesome. Before we move on to the demonstrations, do you guys have any questions for Gene about his background, about getting into drawing? Oh, here, do you want to give her the mic?
Oh, travel mic, yeah.
Is it on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. When you were a kid, did you know 100% that you wanted to be an artist?
Oh, yeah, I pretty much knew I wanted to be an artist as soon as I saw my older brother drawing, and I was like, that's cool, I'm going to do it too. Though my mom informed me when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old that artists almost inevitably go insane, cut off their ears, and one of their ears, and mail it to a woman. So, if I didn't want to cut off my ear someday, I probably don't want to be an artist.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. I didn't warn you guys about that, did I?
Yeah. He hasn't cut off his ear yet, but...
Mr. Who, what kind of genre inspired you?
Superheroes. Comics back then were almost all superhero books, and up until the 90s, it was very hard to find American comics inside of other genres. Though, I mean, I enjoyed other stuff. Really loved science fiction and fantasy. I also like a lot of historical stuff and stuff too, and I don't know, a lot of things, but mainly it was superheroes. And then that kind of spun off into other realms when I got tired of some of the tropes that we got stuck in inside of superhero comics.
Yes. How do you differentiate a good idea from a bad idea when you're writing a story or a drawing? Like, what mind process do you have?
That's an amazing question, John.
Okay.
I want to know the answer.
The worst ideas are often the best ones to make a comic. So, scientist who becomes a big giant green monster whenever he gets angry sounds really dumb, especially if you're trying to be like hard science fiction or something like that. But it makes for great comic book stories. I was just on a panel at Capricorn in downtown Chicago where we had Why Mouse Matters. So Art Spiegelman's Mouse, M-A-U-S, is I'm going to tell the story of the Holocaust using cute animal cartoons.
Yeah, doesn't seem like it sells when you
Awful
pitch it.
idea.
When you pitch it like that, it sounds
Yeah.
pretty dumb.
Awful
Yeah.
idea. And if
Yeah.
you try to imagine like Porky Pig going into a concentration camp, it's like, this is dumb. But he made it work. So the worst ideas are often the ones that work the best.
It is an amazing thing about comics is that because it's the, I'm going to say this, the bastard child of media, right? We sort of exist in the interstices of the until recently, I should say. Now comics are everywhere, but there's so much that's made in comics that you can just experiment, right? You can do the craziest ideas, and nobody's stopping you from doing it. So there's room to make those kinds of stories that don't seem like they would work.
The way I'd call it is, I think comics is a garage band medium. Where if most visual mediums, visual storytelling mediums, except for children's storybooks and comic books, require hundreds of people usually. A video game team will have, a major tentpole video game will have like hundreds of people working on it. Approval processes, millions of dollars invested. So if you have a bad idea and you want to develop it into a great story, no one's going to approve it because no one's wants to lose, $20 million on your bad idea. But if you have just yourself or you and a small group of friends, and you want to tell an amazing story like Mouse, which came out originally in Raw magazine, so it's essentially Art Spiegelman mostly working alone with help from his wife and a few friends to get the book out. Yeah, then you can tell the crazy stories.
Indeed.
And sometimes it turns out they're revolutionarily beautiful.
Yes, and Mouse won the Pulitzer Prize. I don't remember what year that was.
Yeah, and it's
And recently in the news, have you guys read the news about this comic recently? Yes, it was banned in Tennessee public schools. Was it Tennessee?
in one county in Tennessee.
In one county in Tennessee, and because they thought it had imagery that would disturb their children, right? And
it had
profanity.
It had a
nudity.
hint of a nipple.
A hint of a nipple.
And some very tiny little drawings of full frontal.
And
men.
the result of this, if you flip through the news and you see this, the sales of Mouse have skyrocketed, and people are buying hundreds and thousands of copies of it and distributing it among schools. So it kind of backfired on them a little bit.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I wanted to know, how do you deal with like kind of not losing an idea? Because I know like you often have a lot of like projects going at once as a professional in the art industry. So how do you like not let them overlap almost? How do you keep them independent from each other?
I mean, a lot of my ideas are ones that took years or even a decade or more to develop. So part of what happens is they get better over time if they're the ones that you continue to be passionate about. If you're not passionate about it, 5 years from now, it's no longer the idea you should be working on. But as long as you're inside of an environment where you're all hopefully trading ideas back and forth, or seeing each other's ideas and thinking, oh, I didn't know that was possible. I can do something like that too, but different. Just write them down somewhere or doodle them down somewhere and save the notebooks or however you're going to save the files. And when you need it, hopefully you'll be able to go back and just pick it up.
And sometimes they enter into something you're working on now that's different.
Yeah.
I find that to be the case. Like you wrote this idea down a while ago, and then suddenly, oh, that totally applies to this other thing that I thought was totally unrelated.
Yeah. I think his name is Robert Kirkman, but when he did his first comic,
Yeah.
it was Battle Pope.
Yes.
He had a bunch of ideas, but he thought the best one was it's the 27th or something century, and in space,
Yes.
the Pope is the most powerful warlord of them all, but other empires are coming for him.
This is the creator of Walking Dead. You guys, do you guys know
Yeah.
Robert Kirkman? Yeah.
Yeah,
His
and-
first comic was Battle Pope.
Yeah, and then he did and then he did Invincible and a bunch of other stuff. But I mean, save all ideas, do the one you're passionate about, and if you lose passion for it, if it turns out not to, you can't keep on doing it, you have the other ones hopefully still saved up, or you'll come up with new, better ones.
Cool.
I'm also going to mention with May, originally I was thinking of it as a space opera, and I kind of felt like, for some reason, I'm kind of getting stuck on the idea. And the older sister, who's the action hero, you see here, the one with the red cap, she was the main character. And I kind of like, for some reason, I'm just not coming up with enough stories for her beyond she punches something. And it took me a while to realize the younger sister, who loves science and technology, is the main character because she has a place to go and she has a different reaction to situations that I thought would be more interesting than the older one. And also, originally, the older sister was wearing a spacesuit. And but then I drew her in this costume, which kind of looks like what now looks like a costume from Hamilton.
Indeed.
And part of how I developed my world was I realized, oh, I need to build a world where her wearing that outfit makes sense.
Wow, that's amazing. So, the drawing, in a sense, came first before the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Oh, I'm just going to say very quickly. This is a quote from my art hero from around a sketchbook he did in around 1992, where he's talking about how before CGI, before 3D computer graphics in movies, he said doing expansive special effects inside of movies is ridiculous. You want to do them in comics because there you have a budget that would take of practical special effects. But a few years after he said that in that book, Independence Day came out, and movies like The Matrix and Terminator 3, and suddenly movies were actually better at doing a lot of these things than comics were. Now you had to invest millions of dollars to make it look right, but they could do something that couldn't practically be done in comics.
Yeah.
So that's why I say the strength of comics is, again, we're a large band art form, where the things you can do yourself or with a small team of friends are the best ideas. So, I mean, who's asked a question about bad ideas? Oh, okay. Okay. Actually, okay. Oh, hi, John. Okay, so the bad idea generally tends to be the one where it will take, I will do a photo, like a highly painted, super detailed comic book with a cast of thousands. It's going to be the first of 9 volumes, and each volume is going to be 120 pages. That's an awful idea, if it has to be told that way. Now, if your world is interesting, or your story setting is interesting, tell some short stories in it. And if those short stories are interesting, you know you're onto something. And you can blend those short stories later into the larger narrative, but don't do something where it depends on the reader getting in 70 pages before it really starts to get good. That's about the only thing I would say is a bad idea in comics. Some crazy people have done that, and it's worked out beautifully.
If you can publish it as a big volume, maybe.
Yeah. But generally, you want it to be entertaining in small chunks.
I was going to say, sometimes in certain stories, the story will start really exciting, and you'll think it's one kind of a story, and it works for that first couple issues as one thing. But then 30 issues on, it evolves into a different kind of story.
I will say there's a trick where you can change genres, but make sure that very early on in your story, you make clear what kind of fun and what kind of entertainment you're providing to the reader.
Right.
You don't want to switch that the second issue in, or 50 pages in, or something like that.
Right.
So I had a friend who I was like saying, "Hey, would you want to work on a story with me?" We'd actually played role-playing games when we were kids.
Yeah.
And it started off as John Carpenter's Thing, like Arctic horror story. And then, in the middle of the second issue, he wanted to turn to a swords and sandals story. And I was kind of like, okay, that's cool. That's cool to make a transition like that, But you can't do that in the second issue of a series because everyone who loved
Right.
the Lovecraftian horror of the first issue
Yeah.
is going to quit reading it with the second issue when
Right.
they find out
and
it's
you
not
have
that
to
anymore.
find a totally new audience suddenly for.
Right.
Yeah.
But then those people won't find your book because they'll read the first issue and it's like, oh, I love swords and sandals. What's this Lovecraftian horror in the Arctic thing?
Right. Indeed.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
you have to be subtle. You have to make. Now you can change genres,
Mm-hmm.
but the fun he was providing, which was unabashed, hey, I've got a sword and I'm unstoppable,
Yeah.
is totally different than fighting monsters in the Arctic and we can't stop them.
Right.
It's different fun.
Right. Awesome. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to
good.
mostly do the storytelling presentation in form of slides because I'm going to show you how I actually do a story, which involves a lot of very elaborate stages sometimes. The start is really rough and simple, and then we get to the incredibly fancy stuff. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit over how I build up a story. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to show how I'm doing stories right now. You can see that in my history of how I do comics, it's gone from a transition of increasingly detailed black and whites or markers. There's the color version of that page that Mr. Gatuda was showing, to Photoshop colors, including when I was doing May. But I'm working on a new style now, and I wanted to simplify things down because, again, I believe comics is the best of comics is a garage band type medium. And if you can get an idea out quickly and powerfully, it's better than doing it elaborately, but taking forever to do it. So the script is a story where literally the writer of an issue of May is talking to the character I visually based on her. And this is the script. And this is the rough. I like to plot out as much as I can in the early stages. So you can see here I've kind of roughed in the text, roughed in where everyone's going to be placed. But for my own personal preferences and how I do tell a story, I like to have even more detail than that. But I want to make sure the basics, elements, actually have enough space for each other. And the best way to prove to someone who's hiring for Scholastic or DC that you're not ready for prime time is to not leave enough room for the word balloons. And at this stage, that's when I hired my letterer, Xander Cannon, who also worked with me as layout artist on Top 10, to actually do in the final letters so I know exactly where they are, at least in the English language edition. Mr. Gatuda also said wanted examples of like how I use photo reference. So I wanted to give you kind of a feeling for how much photo reference I use. In this case, because I based both characters on the writer, I was able to use her as a model for the story, which I usually don't do. Usually it's just a little bit too much bother to shoot photo reference of anything beyond possibly than the main characters, and often even then, I can't do it. But in this case, it was relatively easy. But that wasn't the only reference I did. I like to try to get every detail right to what I'm trying to get, effect I'm trying to get. So this is the full reference file for my 2-page story. Or reference folder. Okay, so I laid in the lettering. Oh, wait a minute.
And when you're drawing the initial layout, is that in Manga Studio? Is that what you were saying? Or what do you use for that process?
For this one, I think,
Or
yeah, I
just
think
on
this was in
paper?
Manga Studio.
Yeah.
Oh, not Manga Studio, Procreate.
Oh, it's in Procreate. Okay.
Though I did the layouts for the word balloons and the panels in Manga Studio.
Oh, okay.
Just because they're so good there. So the rough lettering was done there, and then the panel borders, because it's so easy to do consistent gutters between the panels.
So you're planning where the balloons are going to go when you're drawing the imagery.
Yeah, it's if you don't plan it early enough, they can end up with like the famous dueling word balloons, and then the dueling word balloons can be dueling teams of word balloons,
Yes.
and that just becomes horrible.
Yes.
I also, just as a matter of opinion, I don't think having more than an exchange of, one person talks, the other person talks, the first person responds, or the reverse. Anything more than that, I think, doesn't usually fit well into one panel.
Right.
And at that point, you're pretty much just writing a text piece. If you
Right.
can't do that and break into a new, into a new
Yes.
panel.
And
tell
your
that
name may be Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah. A really simple way to think of it is that each panel should have one important bit of transition, one important bit of information of how things have changed since the last panel. And if you have that many exchanges back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between two characters, unless they're incredibly simple, like two people arguing yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, it's just too much information.
Yeah.
And you're not representing the emotions on the face. I mean, there's going to be, the people's emotions are going to be shifting across the course of this conversation. And if it's only represented with one image, it probably doesn't make sense.
Right.
There's a few exceptions, like if you have a long shot where it's two people walking down the street, they're tiny in the background, and you have kind of a wandering conversation between them, but it should be on the same beat. It shouldn't be shifting information, and they're starting to shift positions or emotions or stuff.
Yeah. Oh. That's fine.
Publisher-driven versus you, like artistic-driven. Like you may want to expand out that many boxes over so many pages, but the publisher may say the book has to be short.
No, in general, the person protecting you from the publisher tends to be your editor. And the editor hopefully understands the corporate side pretty well, and they also understand the creative side pretty well. And it's pretty rare to have an editor who would want you to cram all that type of stuff in. The only times that are going to happen is essentially when you have a relatively rich person starting up their comic book company who doesn't understand how comic book storytelling work and wants to hire you as the artist and doesn't know why that can't be done.
Cool.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, so from there, I turned that into my pencil stage. And in Procreate, I like doing almost all of a medium tone before I start going into the blacks. I don't like putting in more line work than is necessary or trying to define everything with a line. So by doing this, it helps me avoid from just going overboard with the line work. Like, for instance, you can end up doing the hair with just spaghetti lines, which I think is not usually the best way to do hair. So that's what that looks like without the pencils and the balloons on them.
Wow. And so far, this is all in Procreate, or this entire book is in Procreate? from start
It's
to
in
finish?
Procreate with a little cleanup afterwards in Photoshop.
Wow. And you were able to get high enough resolution to do a 2-page spread at one go?
And
on
a
document?
standard size US comic book page, it's usually 600 DPI, and I did this at 1,000.
Wow.
Then this is the cleanup in Photoshop, where the selection tools in Procreate aren't great, so it's hard to do this type of just simple cleanup inside of Procreate. And I'm going to show you how I use the photo reference to kind of do that. From the rough stage, I then took photo reference shots. There it is with the word balloons. You see that transition to the pencil stage?
Right.
That helped me with the shading and stuff like that. I can draw in this style very convincingly without photo reference, just out of my head. But having photo reference is always a little better. There's little subtleties of expression where it'll change how the shadows fall and stuff like that. So for me, I really like having that photo reference if it's super easy and it's not going to put me behind deadline.
Right.
And you can see here, when I say that I'm trying not to go overboard with the ink stage and not use too many lines, you can see how much detail has been left out inside these panels. But if you switch over here, pretty much all the details are there except for the slightly older characters' eyeglass frames. Now, I did that because I like to include a lot of background inside or a feeling of background inside my panels. But I started off inside the era when you literally mailed a black and white page, or hopefully a pile of black and white pages by FedEx to an office in New York or California. And then they would, I was going to say scan, but literally it was a photostat. They took a giant camera about 3 feet across and then took a photograph of your artwork, and it had to be in black and white or the photostat wouldn't work.
Right.
And then they would turn that into print plates.
Yes. And these days you just throw
These
it.
days, yeah.
You just throw it into Dropbox or something, or you email
Yeah,
it to them.
and whatever file system, file
Yeah.
transfer system they're using.
Yeah.
So currently I'm working on, as we mentioned, as the instructor mentioned before, I've been working on Wonder Woman Historia, and that allows me to do a lot more elaborate things. So I'm going to show you a little sequence here
Yeah.
and how I did it. But first, a little intro into what the scene is about. This is all spoilers. I should warn you about that. So the book comes out April 5th. So the story, the Amazons and a group of liberated women in ancient Greece have formed a society inside of an abandoned Greek city. But after liberating some other women from some slavers, the young woman in the corner here is still really angry that they didn't kill one of the people in the slaving party because he was young. He was just a child. Though about the same age as her, so in her head, it's not a child. And she knows, she found out afterwards that after they let him run away, he'd thrown hot oil at one of the women and scarred her. And there was almost no punishment for what he did. So she's gonna go after him. So script stage. And it's pretty simple. It just talks about, we then go to a not abandoned Greek city. There's a marketplace. The boy who escaped from previous night's slaughter lurks near the market. A bird lands, the boy's hungry. He tries to steal some food. And then a vendor sees him and tries to stop him, yelling, "Thief, dirty thief," and the boy runs away with the food. Then with the food, the boy then sneaks into a temple of Apollo and then pleads with the idol, the statue of Apollo inside the temple, that he wants vengeance for the girl who killed his relatives and then turned him into a beggar and thief on the streets. And then, as he's pleading to the statue, the young woman then comes up behind him and says, "No mercy." So this is, and this is in pencil, on paper. Whew. My mask is getting very steamy in here. And so this is as rough as it gets. I think this might actually, yeah. And the original on this was probably about this big.
So truly a thumbnail.
Yeah. So I wanted to just make sure that I put all the major elements down that I really, really wanted to get into the scene. And then add elements to the scene that take the basic concepts that Kelly Sue gave me and deepen them to kind of emphasize all the themes that she's talking about. So do you guys know very much about like the famous ancient Roman sewers?
No. Do you?
Okay. Okay, so ancient Rome was one of the first cities in the world to have a sewer system to wash away all the sewage, so it wasn't literally running down trenches in the street, which really cut down on disease. It was hard for the Greeks to have a city of 10,000 people without having plagues break out and killing a lot of people. But in ancient Rome, they had a population over 1 million, and not a huge plague problem. Like they'd go for centuries without a big plague killing everybody. So anyhow, but this is ancient Greece, and it's filthy. They don't have sewers yet. Everything's going down trenches and gutters in the middle of the street. Everything.
Indeed.
So again, a kind of a feel of photo reference. Now, if you go look at these little thumbnails, you'll notice there's almost no photo reference I've shot of figures except for a few of myself.
So that's mostly architecture and.
Yeah, it's all the details, like
Yeah.
what did an ancient wineskin look like?
Right.
What did an ancient sausage look like? Which I decided is going to be the piece of food that the little boy's going to steal.
Wow.
What does a goose look like or a deer look like when it's being hung by a butcher? Things like that. Just weird little details that.
What was life like before the internet? Trips to the library.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure that what I do is work research because
Yeah.
it's good to always use the internet, but there is that sort of, like back in the mind of saying like, is what the person's saying is true or not? So you always have to make sure that what's being said is book reference.
That's for factual research. I'm actually just looking for images.
Yeah.
So for a lot of this stuff, it'd be very hard to do book research. I mean, some of the stuff I do definitely use it, and I have a pretty decent-sized visual library of books and stuff like that. But if you can find it on the internet, I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to know what Fifth Avenue looks like from a certain angle, I have like 7 different books on New York City street scene photos. But getting the exact angle I want is almost impossible, but Google Maps is easy. It's just
Right.
exactly the shot I need.
Wow. Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking
Yeah.
about book reports and factual reports and stuff like
Right.
that. I'm talking about just visual
Yeah.
things. It's
Yeah.
totally different.
Totally.
Okay, so moving on.
Yeah.
So one of the things I learned from the previous story is that I really want to plot out the lights and darks. And you can see how I use these tools to kind of draw the eye to where I want it to. So in the first scene, we're trying to establish what this kind of plaza inside this ancient Greek city looks like, and establish that the little boy is hungry, and he's getting ready to steal some food. And in my head, I also wanted to show, unlike the Paradise Island type of society that the Amazons and the freed women are setting up, this place is disgusting. So I set it up. There's supposed to be a bird that lands who's a messenger from Hera, and she's looking at the boy. It is a female bird. She's looking at the boy. And then I wanted to draw as much feces as I could possibly fit into the scene without being unrealistic. So here's a woman pouring a chamber pot. I'm not sure what Greek chamber pots looked like, which essentially is the large bowls they use as toilets.
Right.
But I did use an ancient Roman one, which I think is probably similar. A man stepping in probably farm animal dung, stray dogs, and then a small pen here where various animals are being slaughtered. And I'm trying to draw the eye in kind of a zigzag, so we end up on the boy. So essentially, there's a lot of clutter on this side, except for the bird, on the bird feces spattered statue. But then everything gets to a very simple spot where the boy's the only interesting thing left, and even the dog is just looking at the boy. And if you have any questions along the way about stuff, please go ahead.
Sure.
I then take that to the pencil stage. I don't try to reproduce all the light-dark values of the stage because I already have it planned out inside the previous stage.
Right.
But now I just want to make sure all the details are about right. In this one, because there's so much detail, I did want to start with the inks first, or the ink lines first, as opposed to the shading. And you can see here, I wanted the boy to look vulnerable and small. So I went from making him larger, like you can see inside the original pencils, and I just procreate, select, shrink it.
Right. Question?
So how long does this process take you?
It can take many days. I have had an incredibly loose deadline on this project. In a way, I mean, kind of like my side things, like doing sketch commissions and stuff like that, have been supporting me and my wife while I've been drawing this book, because I really wanted it to look good. And if you get a chance to see the first volume by artist Phil Jimenez with Kelly Sue DeConnick, it's even more detailed than this, oftentimes. It's,
I just read that, and it's like you need a microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there are literally scenes that are beyond human comprehension, visual
Yeah.
comprehension, printed on that page. You have to get the digital edition and blow it up, and then you can finally see.
Yeah, and it's printed big, so and even on the huge print, it's like super detailed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a European album size, like
Yeah.
Tintin or something. And then you can see the finished version here. At least the finished as far as inks go. There's going to be colors coming in after this.
Are there a lot of word balloons or any word balloons on these pages, or are they?
That's one of the things why I wanted to show the previous story, because that's a story I controlled. I was able to control the workflow.
Right.
So at the point I did this, I didn't know which colorist was going to be working on this, and I got approved for Wesley Wong, a local colorist I really like. And I'm still not sure what letterer is going to be working on it and where they'd want to place it. It's a huge advantage if you know where the word balloons are early on. But in this case, I just had a guess, and I kind of provisionally put them in. The most of this page is almost no text except for the last panel having thief, dirty thief.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's here, the boy is pleading with Apollo as soon as starting with the second panel. So you can see I just left huge spaces to leave options for the letterer.
Yeah.
And going back to the script really quick. They're not gigantic word balloons. Like these are the two biggest.
I have nothing left, no one.
Yeah, but you can see it's not
Yeah.
a giant monologue all in one panel. It's a decent-sized monologue split into all the panels.
Right.
And Kelly Sue DeConnick has a very good sense of storytelling rhythm for comics. So you're not ending up with the evil self-publisher who doesn't know comics jamming a giant conversation to one panel.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to also mention another thing, which is you'll see this trick really used here. I try to do kind of a halo of simplicity, or actually this one's a really good one for that too, this central panel here. I can throw in a lot of detail on these two panels, but I try to put a kind of a halo of simplicity around the most important part of the panel, and usually to leave it somewhere kind of centered. So you can see there's everything in the first panel is clutter, 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 clutter. It's all noise. But the only place where your eye can kind of just rest peacefully is on this nice high contrast area where the boy is. And I was about to pinch and zoom on the TV screen. You can see he's also the highest contrast area, where like this figure in the foreground is dark, dark, dark. This one's medium and light. The boy's the only area where you have light and dark all meeting. And then the same thing with this panel here, where kind of an unpleasant noise pattern at the top here, but then at the bottom, a nice place where your eye can rest. It's high contrast, but peaceful. And just your eye wants to look at those kind of areas on a composition.
I have a question that I think interjects well at this point. You know, this is drawn digitally, and you know, you used to draw all on paper,
Yeah.
you know, with real pens and ink and stuff. Having small characters in a panel, right? There's always a question of how much detail do you put into them. How do you decide? I mean, obviously you'd probably put less detail in the background, more detail in the foreground, but with Procreate, you can zoom way in. How do you decide how much detail to put into a character depending on their scale, and is that different when you're drawing digitally versus on paper?
I mean, you can go really insane with the detail digitally, but let's go back to this one.
I've noticed that in more and more comics, how characters in the background are clearly drawn big and then shrunk.
Oh,
these
yeah.
days. Many artists are doing that versus almost drawing them in a different style in the background.
The way I put it is every detail and every line should count. And don't really, I mean, you can throw in more detail if you want, but don't put in so much detail that distracts. And it should tell a story. It should help tell the story. So like, I threw in detail on these figures in the foreground only because on this book, this was my editor and my assistant editor, and I wanted to do a shout out to them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have actually done them in detail. These people on the other side of this glass or reflected in the glass, they don't count, so they're not really important. I threw enough detail on these two figures. You'll see they're actually drawn pretty sketchily, just to indicate it's a human and something not human sharing a meal together, just to indicate that. And then behind them, you'll see a waiter, but just to indicate there's waitstaff there at a restaurant. But I didn't want to throw in too many excess details. Most of the figures inside this one are kind of smudgy. Well, the ones that are important are smudgy. The ones who are actually in detail in the background are literally some of the characters that she's talking about in her dialogue.
Right.
And it's kind of a meta Fellini type scene where people who shouldn't be there are actually there in the background, like, oh, and then my friends were, I like hanging out with my friends, and then they magically appear in the background waving or something like that, and then walking by.
So you needed more detail in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Similar thing here where she's talking more about her friend. Pasha was delightful to write, and you and your best friends. I needed to get lady friendships right. And those are literally the friends she's talking about in the background behind her while she speaks.
Right.
And then they're talking about the wicked and the divine. So I threw in the writer of the wicked and the divine and the artist he's currently working with in the background there. So otherwise I would have done him a lot more smudgy. You'll see like most of the characters in the background here are just smudge, smudge, smudge to kind of indicate a head,
Right.
except for the ones she's directly talking about.
Right.
So yeah, if you can get away with just enough detail to indicate what it is. So
Right.
I think it's pretty clear that off the top of her head, this is a pillar. Probably lantern, but it's literally pale smudge. And then another smudge here to indicate there are more people in the background. I mean, you don't have to throw in more detail, unless that's the point of the story, which gets to one of the things with the Kelly Sue DeConnick story, where one of the themes of the story is that all people are important, and that just because you've been captured by ancient Greek slavers, that doesn't mean you're not an important character in the story. So I literally wanted to give each of these characters a distinctive face and look, and I felt really bad if I drew them as a smudge. So I kept on drawing crowd scenes where I drew every face in, which was killing me, but it helped the story. But if you can get away with it and just want to do some smudges once in a while, yeah, do the smudges, or less, or whatever you do instead of smudges.
Right.
But yeah, if you need it for the story, draw it
Yeah.
in. Sometimes it's painful.
But you can do that with Procreate. You can zoom right in and
Oh yeah,
draw,
yeah.
draw the details.
So if you like,
Yeah.
look at the details here.
Yeah.
The other thing is I was following in the footsteps of Phil Jimenez, so I would never have drawn a character where in some of these scenes you can make this chimera on the shoulder armor, little statue of a chimera on the shoulder armor, is not important to the story in any way,
Yeah.
but it was important to how Phil did his visuals, and then I was stuck doing the same thing. So I wouldn't have done that, but
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes you're in situations like that if you're following someone else's project or
Sure.
making an homage to it or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, let me see. Okay. So going from there. So does anyone have any more questions about doing layouts, storytelling, things like that?
I have a few more, but I can wait.
I wanted to know kind of how you drew the line between style and like what needs to be shown in the visuals.
Oh, I mean, it's a style. I mean, the style I use can go into almost infinite detail, and some of the other pages, it's so much worse than any of these pages. So painful. Like crowd scenes of people with elaborate Alexander McQueen high fashion armor. But I mean, theoretically, any style can go into almost infinite detail. I mean, there's a thing where, like, on The Simpsons, when they do posters of all the characters who are ever shown up, essentially, with dialogue, and there'll be, like, over 100 characters. I mean...
So it's almost like finding the right way to where to put detail in your own style.
Yeah. Part of it also is, yeah, I mean, you want to... There's a classic example of this is Hellboy. Hellboy was Mike Mignola putting together a comic of everything he liked to draw and trying to leave out the crap he didn't like to draw. So, I mean, if you're going to do your own book that you're going to write and draw, hopefully figure out a way to write and draw about things that you really like writing and drawing.
Yeah.
At some points, you are going to be stuck doing a crowd scene. But, I mean, for instance, you'll notice that most Hellboy stories don't take place in crowded cities with monsters attacking the city and throwing things and giant vehicles. I mean, it tends to be off in an abandoned castle or something. So the World War II Nazis are setting up evil technology to summon demons in an abandoned castle. Because he likes drawing castles. He likes drawing 1940s technology and uniforms and stuff like that, and then having the Nazis in the 1940s uniforms punched really hard. But he doesn't want to do it with like 30 cars in the background and a tank battalion.
Got it.
So, you know,
Right.
that's how he does it.
And you have that option when you're writing it too.
Yeah.
As opposed to writing with the artist.
But,
or the-
I mean, a lot of people end up writing a story, and then you can tell they're avoiding drawing the things that should be in the story, and that gets painful. So, you know,
Right.
Mike Mignola was really good at setting up stories where it all made sense, that he left out details.
Yeah.
I'll also mention, when he first created the style for Hellboy, he didn't think anybody would like it. So I know the editor he sent Ancient Era faxes to say, does this look as bad as I think it does? And the editor had to call him on the phone back and say, this is amazing. And it's like, no, it isn't. And it's like, no, this is amazing. This is the best thing you've ever done. And it took a while for him to convince. He didn't convince Mike Mignola that Hellboy was beautiful, but he did convince him that it could be published without embarrassing himself. And then everyone else told Mike Mignola, this is beautiful. And then he's like, maybe it's beautiful.
Indeed. I think he did it. What didn't Hellboy come from a convention sketch? I think I read that somewhere.
I'm not sure.
Someone asked him to draw just like a superhero demon or something, and he just drew Hellboy, and it.
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah,
it was like a whole, you did I think it was like 4 or 5 page story or something like that, where he really established the whole style for how he's going to do backgrounds, characters, and all that type of stuff, and how simply he was going to draw it. And that was kind of the revolution there. It wasn't, the character design itself is the whole style and the storytelling.
Right, and that was that the 90s? So it was.
Yes.
So when the era of
It was, yeah.
super duper detail, you know, Todd McFarlane, and he's coming along and doing super.
It was an
simple
it was an era when cross-hatching in superhero comics was really popular, but it's cross-hatching done in a way. It was very much like I was talking about Nightcrawler's shadows on his face. No matter where the light was coming from or what which way the character was facing, the cross-hatching was always in exactly the same place, which drove me crazy back then and helped determine my style. Go ahead.
So to start creating comics, you have to know a lot about architecture and people? Like you have
No.
to know both?
Oh, well, I mean, you definitely have to know about people in a broad sense, but
I like people, but
yeah.
I like the building sometimes.
Do you know an artist called Gary Panter? Seriously, look him up. He does, well, I mean, we also been talking about Mouse and Art Spiegelman, who can draw beautiful architecture. But if you look at Mouse, or if you look at the work of Panter, it's like Panther without the H. He's the guy who designed most of the visuals for the TV show Pee-wee's Playhouse. And he's also really sensible, very literally punk, in the original sense of the word, punk comic book artist, where he just strips everything down and works beautifully. And I know a lot of people who are like, as adults or teenagers say, I draw like a child, I can't really draw. And it's like, actually, if you can take the good parts of what you're doing right now and add some design sensibility to it, you're doing amazing drawings. You just have to figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
Indeed. Something I probably say in every single class, and I think I've already said it to you guys, every single one of us has limitations, right?
Yeah.
Ways that we always draw, even though we don't realize we're doing it, things that we have a hard time drawing, right? And, every good comics artist has their own limitations too. They may not be the same as yours, but they've figured out how to turn those into their style.
okay, so this is pretty architecturally sophisticated, what I'm showing here.
Yeah.
This is from 101 Dalmatians. But I want you to look how scratchy and loose it is. You can get away with being, as long as you can indicate what the setting is, you can pretty much get away with having something that's not super realistic. And again, it just indicate and make it fit your style. One thing I'll say I really hate is when people take something that looks like a 3D graphic or computer lettering, like a sign for a sign in the background, but they have a loose style. I mean, at least just like trace it in a loose style. Don't just drop in a line, a wireframe of a building or something like that in the background if you don't
Things
draw
that
that.
look like they look pasted in, they don't look native to the style.
Yeah. But I mean, and just making it a little bit loose and wobbly can actually add a huge amount to the story. Let me see. Where's that scene here? Yeah, I mean, depending on, it's actually kind of fun for me to draw on other people's styles You can see here things are a lot kind of off kilter on purpose. Actually, that's anyway. But yeah, you don't have to get too fancy with architecture. But it depends on the story. If you're doing a story where it's about the architecture,
Yeah.
you're going to corner yourself into a situation where I have to get some of the details just right.
Not every story had those incredibly detailed top 10 backgrounds in them, but for,
No,
that,
but
for
yeah.
that story,
Yeah, my story is people kind of in a realistic city where I could kind of show the grittiness.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show in top 10 that the cities, even the glossiest, most science fiction-y looking parts of the city, are falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, or just throw in jokes and stuff like that, and where by drawing in a very dry, realistic way, it became kind of a funnier joke where I had a fancy part of the city, but I literally made a flower vase in front of the building, a toilet. But it was a fancy-looking toilet.
Right. So I had one other question. I don't know if it'll make sense. I mean, we can edit this in just about page layout, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah.
Let everybody, use the restroom. So when you're doing a page layout, and all the pages you showed us, you work on the left and right-hand pages at the same time.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You always think of it as two pages that are facing each other when you open the book, right?
Yeah. A big influence on me early on when I broke into comics was I began reading Will Eisner instructional books.
Right.
And he calls the 2 pages of a double-page spread the meta page.
Mm-hmm.
And the storytelling has to work across both pages.
Right.
And this is from other places, but comics is a naturally rhythmic storytelling medium. Unless you're doing the infinite scroll webcomic, there's a rhythm where you're reading each panel, then you're reading each page, and then you're reading each double-page spread. And there's a beat that has to happen inside of each panel where something changes. By the end of the page, something has to change, and there has to be something interesting enough at the end of the page where you want to find out what happens next. Some form of cliffhanger, whether it's emotional or whether someone survives or literally falls off the cliff they're hanging on.
Yes.
And then hopefully a bigger surprise at the end of the double-page spread or a bigger cliffhanger.
Right.
But yeah, there should be a significant change to the story with every page.
Yeah.
Where if you took that page out of the story would fall apart.
Right. Right. So you have to think about even and odd pages a little bit differently.
Yeah, and
because of that.
don't drag things out unless you have a really good reason. So like, there's a few artists out there who love doing kind of emotional mood comics. So, cover artist for Sandman, I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he did a book called Cages, where he had, I think it was like a 6-page sequence where it was just a man and a woman going on a date to a jazz bar, and then it was a visual representation. Instead of showing them like having a meet cute and making jokes and drinks and blah, 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 and exchanging stories about their lives to each other, he had the music take over and he did this abstraction for 3 pages. And he's an amazing realistic artist, where just the musical notes and modern art abstractions represented jazz music and showed their emotional journey.
Yeah. Dave McKean.
Dave McKean, that's it.
Yeah.
So there wasn't necessarily a single thing that happened on each page that made sense, but he got the point across. And he couldn't have done it any other way as effectively.
Yeah. But the point being that when you get to the end of a page, you need an extra kick to get, in a sense, to get the reader to go to the next one.
Yeah, I could probably reread those pages, and I bet he actually did have a kick at the end of each double-page spread, because it tended to be a giant meta page, jazz, crazy, modernist composition, with something happens at the end, then you turn the page, and you can see their relationships moving to a new stage during their date.
Right. All right, cool. So my students are this week working on their facial expressions for their characters, for their stories. And so Gene is going to give us a little demonstration and talk about how to draw facial expressions and his sort of strategies and philosophies behind showing character emotions.
Okay, so I got to see a few samples, I think, from previous years of student work. I don't think it's any of the current students.
I don't know, not the stuff I showed you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, the stuff I saw in there, and actually I peeked around the class before we started filming. Most of you actually have really solid body language in your storytelling, so I'm not going to worry a lot about it beyond just some broad strokes. Just some organizing principles as opposed to teaching you how to do it, because you know how to do it. So this is from Will Eisner, one of his books on storytelling, and he just shows how silhouette is really important for getting across the mood of a character. And Will Eisner is famous for very grand, kind of operatic gestures, which is really nice, and he did it beautifully. Especially the folks who are in animation, you probably know what this is?
Oh yeah, the flower bag.
Yes. Yeah, the famous flour sack.
Yeah.
So yeah, the principles of body language, of course, for those of you who haven't seen that in animation or haven't heard this before, some Disney animators created kind of a challenge where they said, I can make anything have emotion. Somebody said flour sack or something like that.
Right.
And this animator then did these little doodles showing he could express emotion just using a sack of flour, which got used very, very directly inside of the original animated Aladdin, where they just took exactly those type of emotional expressions in a four-cornered object and gave it emotions.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden I forgot this guy's name. Paul Ekman, sorry, Paul Ekman. So famous psychologist Paul Ekman posited there are 6 basic emotions, which, I mean, you guys are artists. You pretty much, and I've seen your work, you know how to express these. Though I'll say that I don't think surprise is a basic emotion. I think it's just intensity of alertness, which then resolves into an emotion after you figure out what's going on. And that's why I think it's really cool that they left out surprise as one of the basic emotions inside of Inside Out, which is otherwise based on Paul Ekman's work and the psychologist who came after him, psychiatrist who came after him. So joy involves kind of like just this carefree looseness. I mean, pure joy involves kind of the carefree looseness, unconcerned about safety or threatening anybody else. It's just you in wonder at the world and wanting to take in more of it. So open, non-defensive, non-aggressive type emotions. Very you're really at attention. Fear is about protecting yourself, fearing that there's a danger, which tends to be, kind of almost the fetal position, trying to protect yourself from the blows when it becomes fear. Sadness is accepting that you're going to lose something that you care about. It's surrender. It's a loss of a bit of will. It can be combined with other emotions, like sadness and fear, which obviously implies action, or sadness and anger, which again implies action, not just the classic character from Inside Out just slumping to the ground. But yeah. But I mean, that's the basic thing of just like you lose a little bit of will and a little bit of drive. And you accept that that's the only, there's nothing you can do about it effectively to get it back. Disgust is kind of like what is, in many ways to me, the most interesting of the emotions. Not so much even for drawing it, as it is just for how it explains so much about society. Like first, when I see somebody, like someone come out of the restroom, a man come out of the restroom, and I didn't hear the faucet go off first, there's obviously, I get a disgust reaction. Well, they think, I am perfect and clean, I don't need to wash my hands. Yeah, all the parts I was grabbing and surface was grabbing, it's purified by my perfection.
Was there an article in the Times like last week about disgust?
There's been a lot
I
about
think it
that.
was in the New York Times. Did you read that?
A lot of concepts of caste and race and things like that tend to be on the ideas that I am disgusted with people who aren't like me and stuff like that, which caste, the source of our discontent, I think that's the name of the book. I just bought that, and I haven't had a chance to read it, but it's kind of like, oh, this is creepy, how much a child being disgusted by foods they don't like is similar to people who want to punch little old Chinese ladies in New York City and thinking that's going to solve things by literally punching somebody who you don't want to make contact. You're saying, anyway.
Yeah.
Disgust is very complex and interesting.
It is.
But also, it involves a lot of aggressive looks sometimes. If the snarl, oftentimes when you're disgusted by something, it gets very close to being looking like you're going to bite at it or attack it, but you're also pulling away.
Right.
And then there's pure anger, which is pretty easy. And that tends to be threatening, leaning towards somebody, getting a little bit too close. More so than before with the whole social distancing thing. You kind of know how getting too close to somebody can often be very, very aggressive and pushy and uncomfortable.
Right.
So you know the basic body language stuff in that, like somebody going like this and leaning towards you in a bar and trying to make you flinch. Obviously a very aggressive action.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go over, like, very simply, realistic facial expression and how it applies to any style you want to use. Because it sends a signal to people who see your drawing, not because you have to learn all the detailed facial anatomy and which muscles under the skin of your face make that facial expression. So we all know about what fear looks like, and you can see that this dog is afraid. Now we know what aggression looks like in a dog,
Yeah.
which is very similar to human aggression when it's expressed openly, without any type of mix of emotion.
Yeah.
So these are the two of the three most important facial expressions, which you can kind of blend and use almost as like primary colors. The third one for humans is unique among mammals pretty much to humans, and not even chimps have it. Chimps do not smile like humans. Gorillas do not smile like humans. It's pretty much just us, where if you see somebody smiling, an authentic smile, it means they're happy and peaceful and joyful. If you see a chimp smiling at you, pretty good chance it's afraid and it might want to bite you, or it's making an appeasement gesture, but it's not actually happy. But because it's afraid, it can turn into a violent gesture. If you see a smiling chimp or a smiling gorilla, very bad sign. Also, if you see a dog smiling, oftentimes that's not a happy facial expression. That's kind of a tense facial expression, which means give the dog a little space to let it know that you're not a threat to it, or it might bite you.
I know that dolphins, like the smiling dolphin, that's just an illusion because dolphins actually are very much intelligent, and they do have like, it can have like extremely aggressive emotions too.
Oh, yeah.
I just want you guys to know that.
Yeah, I mean,
That's fine.
yeah, some animals just have a built-in curve to their mouth that looks like a smile, like obviously alligators and crocodiles,
Right.
where if you see a smiling crocodile, again, the same thing, it doesn't mean, especially with the crocodile, that does not mean it wants to play with you and you know
It's
share a
just-
nice meal that's not you.
It's just the natural shape of their mouth, more or less.
Yeah. Okay, so that's actually the end of the slide section. So
Okay.
let me show you a few tricks on that. Okay, so I'm going to show you, let me see. So the basic aggressive facial expression. So you know the cartoony eyebrows for angry. And that's pretty accurate. And the closer you can get the bottom corners to the eyes, or below the eyes even, the angrier it looks. And what's happening, very much like with the dog, you're kind of tensing up your face in a way that's getting your canine's beard and protecting your eyes a bit. Your upper lip, just like the little puppy here, is doing one of the most aggressive things you can do with, well, the most aggressive thing that a mammal can do with its face, which is show off its canines. So the upper lip gets pulled up, which causes that kind of snarling nose, which also squints the eyes a little bit. But short upper lip, even if the teeth aren't showing, humans are good enough at reading facial expressions. We can tell that that's an aggressive face. So that's the basic of doing an aggressive facial expression. And again, like I said, It's related to disgust and disapproval, which are kind of both involve usually a kind of a mild anger or rejection. So that snarl, even if your mouth isn't showing off your canines, doing a facial expression that looks like you're trying to hide that you're revealing, you're getting your canines ready,
Yeah.
is aggressive.
Lifting the upper lip.
Yeah, lifting the upper lip, getting ready to bite somebody. And humans have some of the most pathetic canines among all mammals, or at least forward biting teeth in general. So it's not really an effective threat anymore.
Yeah.
But we still have that signal that we share with the other mammals.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing is emotions like fear and appeasement, trying, kind of a more appeasement type things. So things go in a different direction. We try to signal that we're not going to bite. And that's literally what the facial expression for things like fear and sadness usually kind of express. Instead of the eyebrows going up or going down in the middle, they go up, they tend to go up. And then we lengthen our upper lip. We may show the teeth, but it's not in a way that kind of shows that we're not showing off the canines. And then the kind of, as the phrase goes, having a long face. Literally, your face usually, when you're sad, doesn't actually get stretched that way, in a way it wouldn't when you're angry or something. But especially if you want to kind of cartoony exaggerate it, if you show the lower teeth and have the lips kind of fall downwards, that makes it look sad or fearful. And then fearful surprise with the mouth open. Now, you'll often see, again, the upper teeth are showing, but they're not emphasized. They're not bared for combat. Okay, so the last one. Now, a lot of you may be familiar from a lot of cartoons, animated or comic strip style or stuff like that, that the classic way to draw a smile is essentially the Amazon logo. The upside down umbrella. But you may have also noticed, especially in life drawing classes or drawing from photographs, that while some people do have this kind of upside down crescent moon smile, a lot of people don't. And in fact, if you just keep on drawing faces like that, I call this the Entertainment Weekly host smile, or the car salesman smile. There's a kind of like this creepy quality. I can't show it to you right now because masked. But when somebody gives you that smile and their eyes aren't smiling, it's actually a danger sign, oftentimes, of someone trying to indicate, trust me, when you shouldn't. I want your money, or do blah, blah, blah. It's really, really common. Politicians who have to do this have trouble understanding why they come off as untrustworthy. And it's because oftentimes a political consultant told them, you need to smile more no matter what you're feeling. And actually, if they just kind of went in with a sullen appearance but talked honestly and engaged with people, people would trust them. But because they're smiling like a car salesman, people are like, something's wrong with that person. I don't know why, but I don't trust them. So I'm going to give you the two tricks for what an authentic smile looks like. So this is one trick, even though I'm drawing two things. When you're really smiling, the corners of your mouth dimple. And even if you have one of those smiles that's not actually an upside down, the corners turn up if it's a real smile. And in fact, going really cartoony with it, but using that principle, as long as you turn the corners up, so I'm going to draw these little thumbtacks here with the points pointing down and the heads turning up a little bit to the sides, I can literally draw almost any shape I want in between, but it comes across as a smile. And obviously anatomically impossible, but as long as you get the corners in and turn them up, it still implies a smile. And there's that whole, I just ate something sour, but I'm enjoying it thing. Turn the corners up, draw the zigzag.
Yep.
So that's the big trick for that. The other thing is a real smile will turn the corners of the eyes up a little bit and compress, kind of crow's feet the corners of the eyes and stuff. And that's another sign of a real smile. So the eyes, I'm not sure if you heard the song title, When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. That's what they're talking about. And once you add that, it stops becoming the creepy, I'm a serial killer, and also during the daytime, a host for Entertainment Weekly.
Right.
Where those people always look like sociopaths. So that's my basic tricks for how to do facial expressions. And then you kind of you can either magnify what I'm showing you here, or make it a little more subtle, or mix it with a few other emotions, like the other basic emotions from Paul Ekman's theory. But yeah, that's basic ones there. Does anyone have any more questions about facial expressions, body language?
I drew a picture. Oh, okay. In one of my drawings, facial expressions, I drew like smugness, which is a sense of condescension that that the person you're talking to is
Right.
in a sort of condescending way, trying to make fun of them. How would you explain, like, how would you draw that type of emotion? I'm wondering.
So in Paul Ekman's further theories, he theorized that pride is one of the basic emotions, which I think is just BS. I think he was closer on track from the original one. I would describe pride as happiness.
Oh, pride? I meant smugness. Like,
Right. It's a related emotion. I'm doing it as pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But smugness means you are proud of yourself and satisfied with yourself. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from there. So happiness, but a little bit of an aggressive happiness. So short upper lip, a little bit of anger and disgust. So I just kind of blend together those emotions like that.
Right. Yeah. That's certainly smug.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you could do this with almost any emotion, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But just figure out, are they being aggressive? Are they being submissive? Or are they just happy, or a mixture of them?
Yeah.
Or some other emotions. Like, again, surprise is just heightened alertness, which means you're just using, your senses are on alert, and your eyes are wide, you're listening, you're not ready for what to do. It's confusion. Confusion and alertness.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
So you're drawing like a lot of lines around the mouth. Are those super important? Like, what if you're going more cartoony?
Oh, I'm sorry. Drawing a lot of lines around the mouth.
Like, what if you're drawing more cartoony? Would you have to like?
Oh, okay. Oh, you know what would be fun? Can I borrow your sketchbook for a second? Okay, let me tear this off. New sheet. Okay. So we're going to try to do this in something related to your style.
You don't have to do that.
Oh, no, it'll be fun. Okay, so I'm going to do it in kind of a manga influence style. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to sketch this out first because that way I don't immediately jump into Gene Ha drawing variations on Green Lantern or Superman, which is my tendency because I tended to draw a lot of that as a kid. Okay, so is there a specific facial emotion you wanted? Is there a specific facial emotion you wanted or interested in?
Oh, like scared.
Oh, scared. Oh, well, I mean, that's easy. Okay, so normally a character in the manga style will have pretty almost round or like square proportioned eyes. So I'm going to pop this.
Oh, yeah, okay. Say it again?
I'm going to pop that even bigger. One of the things that happens when people are surprised or fearful, one of the small details is that their eyes dilate a little bit.
Right, I read that in the book that we were studying. Like,
Now,
it's, like,
yeah.
drawing.
Yeah, so the color portion of the eye, the cornea, or is that the cornea? Anyway, does not, yeah, that doesn't change size, obviously.
Oh,
But because the eye's opening wider, that looks smaller proportionally, and because, especially in someone with pale eye color, you can see their pupils smaller, implying a smaller, making all of that smaller implies fear. Kind of sends us the fear signal. So I'm going to open that up wider. And I mentioned long upper lip and surprise, mouth open as a way kind of cartoonily showing fear, like screaming perhaps. To really, really do that. Sometimes in manga, they love playing with going beyond anatomy. So in this case, I'm literally going to extend the upper lip, and then drop the lower edge of the lip so it goes beyond the jaw.
right.
And then eyebrows up. And again, if you're doing it in a non-realistic style, or to some extent, you can kind of fudge this and cheat with this in a realistic style. Eyebrows really high. And I don't think they do this so much inside of manga, but I'm going to do it here. I'm going to play with the hair, where you may see this on your forearms or stuff like that when people are afraid. You get goosebumps, and just like a cat trying to make itself look bigger, we're trying to make our body's trying to make ourselves look bigger by making our fur stand up, but we have almost no visible fur, so it doesn't work anymore, just like our canines barely can bite anybody. Lions are not afraid of human teeth, but it happens. So, in a style related to yours,
Because if you add like a lot of wrinkles to the anime, it can look really weird unless you're going for like that really distinct emotion or strong emotion. Sometimes it works, but
I mean, there's different kind of lines you can add if you want to, but there's how it, but if I'm just going to generally simplify it, and I'm not saying this is exactly how they would do it in anime or manga, but this is how I would adapt that style to do it, and I would have the hair standing up. Oh, and I'm going to make that a little darker just so it's easier to see.
okay. So like the pupils get smaller, and you can exaggerate more with the mouth in anime type form.
Lengthen the upper lip, depending on how surprised they are or how noisy if they're yelling or not.
Yeah.
Open their mouth more or less. I mean, you could do the same thing with mouth closed, and it'd be a slightly subtly different surprise.
Excuse me.
But you can do it with the mouth. You can do it with the mouth closed too, but it implies a slightly different shade of emotion. But if you do this, it it is someone screaming with fear. That's great. Yeah, so again, basic tools. You don't have to add all the lines, but sometimes, I'll say in manga, they love adding all those lines for aggression.
I have a very unique cartoon style, and I was wondering if you could. I have a very unique style of drawing humans. So, these.
Oh, here, get your book back.
Like these two.
Thank you for letting me borrow that. Okay, so is there kind of a specific emotion you wanted to kind of represent, or want me to represent?
Like sadness.
Oh, okay. Put this here for a second. Okay, so sadness is related to fear, but it's distinct. But you get a lot of the same kind of looks to it. And it's in kind of similar situations where both are showing expressing that you're not fighting anymore. You're not being aggressive. You kind of lost will. Though sadness is not just not willing to fight, but also not really too much willing to do anything. So I'm going to turn up the eyebrows. There's a thing where, like, biologically, even babies can notice that famous 11 mark here, where the wrinkles form when you're tense or sad. So despite the fact that your style is very simple, I'm going to add those in, so the 11 marks between the eyebrows. So that's fundamentally, even biological. I'm going to shape the eyes with the eyebrows a little bit. And there's a really simple way to indicate tears that's actually, it's not anatomically correct, but it's visually correct in the sense that this is what we see. When there's a tear forming on the lower lid, it kind of obscures the lower lid. So I'm going to draw that little tear bump there. I think this actually is used in anime styles, but yours isn't really an anime style. It's something.
It's not really. It's like cartoon.
Yeah.
It's cartoons slash. I trying to make my.
Oh no, that's cool. That's cool. The Japanese cartoon styles are based on American cartoons, animated and drawn, and then like especially Disney cartoons like Snow White and stuff like that were incredibly influential in the 1930s in Japan.
So my characters have these like big eyes and these.
Yeah.
And
And if you want to keep the mouth really small, widening the mouth expresses a bigger emotion. But if I wanted to keep the mouth small, so I'd go something like this. Or even if you want to go full manga, which again, your style's not, but if you wanted to go there, you could have the tears going off the head. And even if you do the mouth really small, and sometimes if your eyes are really watery, it not only obscures the lower eyelid, it also obscures the bottom part of the cornea and stuff like that. So by doing that,
so when I draw someone crying, I put little glimmer in their eyes.
depending how you do the glimmer, it can imply just having glossy, shiny eyes, like like the happy puppy shiny.
Yeah,
Or-
I would do it. I do that when like characters like crying, like shimmering, like expressing how they feel.
Yeah, but if you put the shimmeriness at the bottom of the eye, especially
Yeah,
along the lower
at
eyelid,
the top.
yeah, it indicates water collecting
Yeah,
at the bottom of the eyelid.
I do it at because.
And then if you want to, you can add a few more lines, but adding lines tends to kind of age and decutesify the character a little bit if you're not careful. So, I mean, I'd feel comfortable adding more lines, but you may not want to. And like even the 11 lines might be too much for you, but they're a very powerful signal, and they could be useful if you want to use them. Also, like that, there's that little stress line there, does similar work. So that's how I would draw your characters being sad, but oh,
You can put let's make that character female. It's the picture underneath. It's the drawing.
oh yeah. I mean, I'm just, I'm not. this is pretty generic. I mean, I could add a little bit of cosmetics, or even if it's really cosmetics, I mean, I could add,
Mascara.
yeah, which is another way to indicate crying
Yeah.
without,
Yeah.
and I could add lipsticks, but there's no lipsticks I see in the drawing you've drawn.
Yeah.
Oh, they're underneath it. Okay. Oh. Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, the only facially, it's just the length of the hair and a little bit of mascara. That's indicating that the face of that character is female or feminine. Right?
Yeah.
Female's biological, feminine is social. So yeah, I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's not wearing like visible lipstick or anything. She just has more stuff around her eyeliner.
Yeah. Great.
So yeah, that's how I do that.
Fantastic.
Actually,
Thank you, Shannon.
here. And actually, if I do a drawing for a specific person, I can just, oh yeah. Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You can take that. You can take the drawing you did of your style later, and that's just yours.
Fantastic.
Okay. So anything else on like body language, emotional language?
Hold on 1 second. The mic.
Okay. I was wondering how you would handle like squash and stretch with emotions when you're working on kind of more of a realistic style and like you don't have the ability to kind of manipulate the face shape into whatever it needs to be.
Well, okay. So everybody knows squash and stretch from animation? Okay. So if everyone's familiar with it, it's mainly about compression and stretch in motion.
Okay.
So if it's a person whose face is just changing facial expression, there's not a real physics to it as far as it's got to hit something, compress, and then bounce off.
Okay.
So it's just exaggeration. So I wouldn't call it squash and stretch,
Okay, so
but you can exaggerate it, facial expression any way you want, even a realistic thing, if it does not break your style and doesn't seem inconsistent. If I, though, I mean, oftentimes you can even break the style for just a panel, and the readers will understand you're breaking the style. Like in anime, I mean, they really love exaggeration, and you'll see a human character will suddenly get fangs and kind of cat features for just a little bit when they're feeling evil. I mean, that's breaking the style in a way from everything else they've drawn in that story, but people understand that it's kind of an exaggeration. In classic like 60s Superman stories and stuff like that, I mean, that Superman could fly into the sun and not worry, clean his suit by just having, nuclear fusion burn everything off. And frankly, the facial expressions weren't really very expressive back then, during that one period of Superman, but they might have like a drop of sweat coming off. I mean, you can add in exaggeration and stuff like that. Okay. Almost every drawing of Wolverine ever inside of Marvel Comics is exaggerated beyond what the human anatomy can actually do. So, I mean, yeah, just exaggerate it as much as you need to get your story across. I mean, as long as you can make it look like it fits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there specific kind of facial expression you want to get exaggerated?
I have trouble kind of balancing, like, I can get anger to look very extreme, but then something like joy, I have a hard time getting to the same level.
Oh, let me see. Can I see your drawings for just a second? Okay. Just your style. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I had your other drawing, sorry.
Yeah, the way oh yeah, excellent. I guess I may borrow that for a second. I mean, the way I want to show really extreme joy is combine it with alertness. So let me put this, let me see, actually I can fit this here. Put this here, because I'm left-handed.
If you want me to show him this one? Yeah, here's her assignment from today.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I mean, the whole, I'm so overjoyed, I'm surprising myself with how overjoyed I am. So, I mean, you can open the mouth wider, and that tends to express things. It tends to be unguarded, so the brow is not furrowed this way or this way. It tends to either be neutral or even raised up, but not in a fearful manner. Okay, so trick one. Corners of the mouth. So that's the real smile. Open the mouth of someone so happy they're kind of surprising themselves. You can do the corner of the eyes just a little bit, but I'd still kind of keep the eyes kind of popped open a little bit. Again, overwhelmed by so much joy, they're kind of surprised by it. So just that little corner there and the turn up of the cheek. You don't have to do a lot of gestures to indicate that whole crow's feet thing, especially in someone young. We don't want to show fear, so I'm not going to do the whole micro-pupil thing. Oh, actually, something else is that when you're engaged and interested in something, you get the opposite of the I'm on opiates, dilated pupils thing. Mm-hmm. And when you're really engaging with someone or something, your pupils get wider. Your eyes become darker. So dark eyes actually show a little bit of interest. So to indicate joy, I tend to make the pupils a lot larger and the eyes darker, but I still put some glitter on it if I want to make it look shiny, puppy-like. There's in one psychological study they did decades ago, they took photos of the same people, and then they photo edited it so that the pupils were different sizes. And the photos where they did small pupils, test participants said the person looks cold, calculating, uninterested, mean. And with large pupils, exactly the same photo, they said, oh, they look friendly, engaged, happy, things like that. So just big pupils is a way to do that. A lot of cartoon styles don't do that. But it's a nice tool to have in your arsenal. And subconsciously, anyone reading your comics will get the signal, even if they don't understand what's going on. So that's how it would show kind of extreme joy. Okay, and you can grab that one later, and I'll return your drawing to you. Okay, any more questions on that? Facial expressions, emotions, body language too?
Question?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, right. Gotta wait for the microphone. There we go. Oh, try not to wrinkle that. You're welcome.
For me, like I'm trying to like make my expressions kind of like realistic. Not because my drawing style is a little more anime, but more realistic and more like expressive.
Okay. You want to make facial expressions more realistic and expressive?
More, yeah, expressive.
Do you have any drawings with you that kind of show what you're doing, or did you do that project, or? Because I mean, there's lots of different ways you can make. Oh yeah, facial expressions more expressive and realistic. Oh, okay. Okay. Like, which facial expression are you trying to like make more realistic or expressive? like, or right now, just at least for now? Anger. Okay, so I'm going to borrow this for a second. Okay, so even on all the different facial expressions you did, and people tend to do this even in animation professionally, you're trying to keep the eyes about the same size in each one. And popping your eyes wider or kind of, squinting a little bit is a really good way to express emotions. And anger, just like with the puppy, is a pretty good way to express emotion. Let me see. Okay, so anger. So I'm going to, I think you'll be able to see this from a distance, everybody, but I'm going to draw in the basic proportions of the face. So this is kind of the neutral face in that style. Okay, so I'm going to make this face angry from this base. So using the things I was talking about over there from that drawing, you can keep the eyes still very wide, but if you're going to take the brow down, push the brow, like you were talking about that, feel free to kind of actually squish and, I forgot the phrase, exaggerate it, but squish and, what's the term again? Oh, so you said it. Yeah, I mean, squash and stretch it, exaggerate it, even beyond what's physically possible, but it's a cartoon character. Now, pushing the middle of the eyebrows down is going to push down the inside of the eye. So you can keep it, for the most part, the same size, but push this edge down. And if you're going to snarl, like extreme anger, I'm going to imply, go like that, literally snarl underneath your mask. And you feel how your cheeks are tensing up there? Those muscles are pulling your upper lip back. So I'm going to squish that to indicate just to kind of hint the muscles are pulling back the upper lip. Nose isn't going to change much. I mean, if she had visible nostrils, you could see the nostrils kind of being pulled back a little bit too. But we're not going to draw the nostrils. Upper lip shortens to bare the teeth. And I'm going to exaggerate the size of the mouth a little bit. I don't know if you're kind of like the manga, my character's turned into a cat type thing, but I'm going to hint at that by actually making visible fangs. You can draw the 11 if you really want to exaggerate that, but depending on how unlined and how prettified you want to make the face, you can leave that out. But any... Oh, sorry, wait a minute, wrong person. Okay, yeah. No. Okay. But yeah, it's useful if you can figure out, for a style like this, if you are going to throw in some type of snarl, creases and stuff like that, crow's feet, whatever, which ones you want to use and which ones you want to leave out. So there's lots of options on which ones you can throw in. So like you could do the snarl around the nostrils and stuff like that, but you may think that just doesn't work with your style. But figure out some that you think do work with your style, and that's really helpful. And also, just like with fear, when you're angry, your pupils tend to dilate a little bit. So if you want to exaggerate that, you can even just, and that looks really psycho. And that's how I would take your character and make a super angry version of it. And of course, you can also just have them so angry they're yelling, but showing off the upper teeth, gritting the teeth, anything like that tends to make it look angrier.
Thank you for sharing that. Great. So we have about 25 minutes left in my class. So the question is, do we want to do a short So discussion of perspective?
I've got some, okay, a very
yeah.
simple trick on
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah?
and it's really, really simple, I promise you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so oftentimes people will draw a scene that's kind of like this. They'll, well, okay, so you've all seen anatomy instructional books, and the anatomy instructional books will tell you to draw a horizon line and a vanishing point here or there, depending on how many points of perspective you have, and then how to do the grid on it, all that type of stuff, and then you start drawing objects on it to fit on the grid. And it doesn't seem to work with the story you're trying to tell, fitting the characters in and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with the scene I'm drawing right here is not that the vanishing points are wrong or the mathematical perspective is off or anything like that. It's scale. And the problem is, this chair, so if I'm standing next to this chair, the front edge of the chair is going to be about knee height, so I can bend my legs and still touch the ground. A human is going to be this big, so about crotch level for the horizon line. A human standing next to this chair is going to be this big. If I take this figure, I'm going to move the figure to the side here and move it to the same distance as this couch back here. A human figure, we see, now because it's horizon line, everything is going to be at the same height at the horizon line.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be crotch level no matter where, as long as the figure is the same height, it's always going to be crotch level at the horizon line. So the foot's here, leg here, torso here, head here. That's how big that couch is compared to my figure. It's a couch that's this tall.
Right.
You need to figure out human scale when you do perspective.
Yes.
So to make a scene like that work, what I like to do, if we're going to start off with the textbook kind of perspective principle of how to do this, I like to sketch in how big the human's going to be. So if we're going to keep the whole horizon line at the crotch thing I just set up, I'm going to sketch in some ghost figures. So they're in the same distance. We know everything along this line here is that scale. Everything at this distance is that scale. So then we put the main character here, standing like this, and then we want to do something this distance away. We know this is the human scale for it. If I go to a doorway, this is a pretty typical doorway. It's about, say, 8 feet tall, or 7 feet tall, somewhere around there. So if they're walking up to a building, the door will be about that tall. A child who's about that tall, standing next to it, could be that tall. A woman walking with this child could be about that tall. Look at the height of the ceiling here. Kind of get a physical feel for how big things are. There's going to be the ceiling of the room behind this is going to be a little higher. It's going to be a few feet thick for the floor. If there's a window, human scale, window's actually going to be pretty high up there. It's not going to be right above that doorway if it's like an old masonry building or something like that. So human scaling everything is really helpful.
All right. So the trick is figuring out where the horizon line crosses the human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this applies to other things too. It often helps if you figure out the scene first, and then do the perspective instead of the reverse. It almost never works to do the perspective first. So let's say you have a scene of big head in the foreground, and then you have somebody else in the background. I'm going to assume they're the same height just to make things simple, like that. So you want to have that scene. It's going to be happening inside a room. So just sketching in some basic measurements, about halfway down, blah, blah, blah. Now, if they're the same height and about the same proportions, the part of their body that lines up the same is the horizon line. Just like on those different figures, the crotch line was always at the same height on the same figure at any distance. So not the shoulder, not the nose, mouth getting pretty close. Let me see. So about mouth level. Mouth level is about horizon line. So a little below the mouth, horizon line. Then if we have someone, let me see. Once we have that, we can figure out a room around them. I'm going to just put a random horizon line or just vanishing point there. This next one doesn't matter because it's off panel. I could draw a ceiling above this character. We can figure out all the perspective in this room just based on this little bit of math. Now, if the characters are different heights, I mentioned before doing ghost figures to kind of figure out the perspective. So we've got whatever Lannister short guy inside of Cyrano de Bergerac right now, I can't remember his name, Peter Dinklage.
Yeah.
And he's standing there and someone tall is talking to him. And then we want to figure out the perspective on this. Say he's about, let me see, just below my chest height. I'm not sure in reality what that would be. But we're going to put a ghost Peter Dinklage next to this figure. So ghost Peter Dinklage, about the same proportion of head, eye, mouth. Again, we end up with mouth. So using that with the ghost Peter Dinklage just for calculating, we know where the horizon line is. My symbol for horizon line, this is totally personal. I do 2 vertical slashes and a circle around it to form a little H to represent horizon line. And it's just an easy way to keep track so I don't mix it up with the other horizontal lines. And then once we have the horizon line, we can figure out the rest of the perspective around them. And that's my trick. And then anything else we want to do in the distance, we can draw a ghost figure behind them to kind of establish how big everything is. So if you want to put a car behind them, and I want to set it here, ghost Peter Dinklage is about this high. If he's this tall, car's about this tall. He probably, depending if it's a tall car, somewhere like car windows about this high. So we know. Then we can draw the car in perspective too.
Right.
So,
Awesome.
Human scale, that's a really important thing with perspective. And as long as you kind of ghost in figures, you'll know how big everything should be.
Right. And it allows you to prioritize composing the panel with the figures and where you want them and the scale you want them and then fit the perspective into that.
Yeah, it's really rare for me to draw a scene and then have it work where I can then draw in the figures afterwards and have the storytelling work.
Yeah. Yeah. The storytelling is the characters first, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless the scene is about the background, literally,
Right.
showing off a building or something. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Awesome. That is fantastic. That is the gist of the demonstrations that we wanted to do. Do you guys have any more questions for him pertaining to the demo stuff? So we got about 15 minutes left. I know Sarah wanted to do a portfolio review with you,
Oh, yeah.
which you could do in the other room. No one else indicated that to me, right? So I want to make sure there's enough time for that. And we can have any more general questions, but let's have a gigantic round of applause for Dean. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks for inviting me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming, for your words of wisdom and your professional expertise. It's all amazing. I learned so much today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yes. Guys, go check it out now that he's got the slides scrolling. You can see some of his Wonder Woman covers in progress and some other great things.
Oh, and if I did a drawing based on your style, please go ahead and grab that one.
That's
is
awesome.
meant for
That's
you.
great. Thank you, Gene. That's an amazing gift.